We've had a day's worth of election campaigning already, 6 more weeks to go, but tonight is our first chance to hear from a cross-section of voters about the issues that matter to them, what might sway their vote and what questions they have for our politicians tonight. And for that, we are in the city of Coventry in the shadow of its beautiful cathedral. 2 of the 3 constituencies here have very narrow Labour majorities, but our audience here, as always, reflects the electoral picture across the country. Welcome to Question Time. On tonight's panel, as always, a wide range of views, starting with Mark Spencer, who is Minister in the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Department, or DEFRA. He spent nearly 3 years as the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson's political enforcer, or party chief whip. And he's the MP for Sherwood, a seat he took from Labour in 2010. And from Labour is Bridget Phillipson, who is Shadow Education Secretary. She was also elected to Parliament in 2010 for Houghton and Sunderland South. Daisy Cooper is the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Democrats, who are keen to build on the 15 MPs they have already. She doubles as her party's spokesperson on health and wants to put the NHS at the heart of their election campaign. And Tim Montgomery is a Conservative thinker and influencer. He created the independent online magazine of the Tory faithful, Conservative Home, and now he contributes to Times Radio, Talk TV and the Centre for Social Justice. Welcome to our panel, welcome to our audience here, welcome to you at home, and of course the general election has started. I don't know if you've noticed. And over the next 6 weeks we will hear from a range of political parties, of course, as we get closer to July the 4th. And you can watch or listen to us on all sorts of ways on BBC Sounds, on the iPlayer. We're always live at iPlayer at 8 o'clock. And we're going to start the programme a little bit differently today, since we obviously watched the Prime Minister in the pouring rain outside Number 10. The general election campaign has begun, and I thought this is the first opportunity here from a cross-section of voters as to what matters to you, what the issues are that will take your vote, what will sway your opinion, and what you'd like to hear from our panel this week. So instead of starting with one question, let's hear a few. So let's see some hands. How fantastic. Right, let's start with the woman here in the glasses at the very front.
One thing that I really care about is support for young carers and for people suffering with mental health issues, because I think both leading parties, hasn't given us an opportunity to see some really progressive policy on that.
OK, the man there in the check shirt.
Election manifestos are often full of what parties want to spend and invest into. What's the individual parties' views on what they would save money on, is what I'd be interested to know.
Oh, now that's not a question we've had before. Right at the very back in the yellow floral shirt.
So I'd like to know, with the pledge for 40,000 new GP appointments from Labour, how they intend to divvy that out over 65 million people.
Woman here in the white top.
I would like to know what we're actually doing in schools to tackle the increase of knife crime and drug abuse in children as young as, 8 years old.
OK, and there's a woman there in a... You've got a black top on, I think. I can't quite see.
I wanted to know if there was any plans on either side to re-incentivise the middle, and what I mean specifically is the higher tax rate band. I feel like it's not been adjusted or looked at in a really long time, and obviously £50,000 today is worth significantly less than it was when it was put at that. And I, someone who's working professional, my husband's a working professional, 3 young children, we should be feeling OK, and we're not.
OK. You feel you're the squeezed middle,
Absolutely,
to quote a phrase?
Yeah.
OK. Man here in the front, in the grey cardie.
I'd like to know how the current government is looking at graduate visa scheme. That's one of the concerns that I'm having right now.
OK. Are you a student here, since we're at Coventry University?
I'm a student at Coventry University. Yes.
Oh, right, OK. Man in the very middle, in the... You've got a suit on, I think. Yeah.
As a teacher, I'd like to know about education and how we're going to support our schools. And as a parent, I'd like to know more about the party's environmental policies and what the future is for our next generations.
OK. Listen, I can see you frantically scribbling down every question. I don't expect you to answer every single question, but this is to get... stand easy. It's to get a flavour of what people are thinking. Yes, where have we got... Yes, the man there, and you're all in black, yeah.
OK, so water companies, councils are going bankrupt. Coventry University today announced that they're going into consultation for possible redundancies in October. I just want to know what all the political parties are planning to do
the university. Yes, I think did you have your hand up in the pink shirt as well?
Yeah.
Take one last point from you, yeah.
Well, NHS is my big worry. Personally, I've found myself having to go private on 3 separate occasions because the waiting list to see consultants is just way out. Forget it. You know, it's just not. You know, it can't be done. Right. So I've gone private and paid up and seen a guy, and you know that's the way I've been forced to work.
Right. Well, listen, that's really, really interesting, and I think thought-provoking, actually. I mean, I made a note: support for young carers. What you're going to save money on, new GPs, schools, universities, the environment, graduate visas, health. I mean, there's a whole cross-section there. And as I say, I don't necessarily expect you to answer every single one, because others, each one of you will be here all night. But this is what people here care about. Mark, how are you going to persuade these people they should be voting for you?
Yeah, so I mean, I think clearly there's a very large cross-section of issues. I think the next 6 weeks will be a huge opportunity for politicians of all political parties to set out their plans and to set out what their solutions are to some of those challenges, to stand on the record that they have and what they've delivered on in the past. And we can only deliver on most of those challenges, with the exception of the gentleman who asked about how we can save money, if we've got a strong economy. And we have to have a strong economy as a country in order to fund the great public assets that we have. And I think the good news is we've just started to turn that corner. We've just managed to get inflation back under control. We've got growth going again. We're actually growing faster than the US, Italy, Germany, and France
only
and
if
Japan.
you look at Mark, that is only if you look at one quarter. If you look at GDP compared to hang on, let me finish the point. Before pre-pandemic, we are much lower than the Eurozone average. Our GDP is 1.7% higher than it was pre-pandemic. The US average is 8.7%.
So my point is,
we have
literally just turned the corner. We've just got ourselves back on track, and I think that's good news for us as a nation, because it means that now, as the economy continues to grow, because of the challenging decisions that Rishi made as Prime Minister, we can then invest in all of the things that people are talking about and care about.
Bridget?
I mean, I think it was, from my point of view, great to hear so many people raise issues connected to education. That's incredibly important for us going into the election, whether it's schools, as we heard, the challenges around mental health. That's why we've said Labour will invest more in mental health support directly into our schools. Our brilliant universities are under so much pressure at the moment. But alongside that, and I think, here today in Coventry, there is a real opportunity to invest in the technologies of the future. So making sure that right throughout people's lives, they've got the skills that they need to get on. So we'd, for example, reform the apprenticeship levy, make sure that people throughout their working lives have the chance to upskill and retrain and come to university if that's what they want to do, including later on in life as well. But this general election will be a moment, really, that will define so much about our country for the next decade or so. It's our chance for change as a country. We've had 14 years now of the Conservatives, and I don't feel that anything's really working better than it was since 2010. And there is a real moment now, I think, where we can turn a corner, start to get our country back on a better path, but alongside that, bring back some stability and some security for people in their lives. We've had chaos in recent years, so many changes of Prime Minister, of Chancellor, and our economy has suffered. And to the lady's question about the shape of the economy and what people are feeling, no matter what any graph will tell you, what working people know right now is that they're really, really feeling it in their day-to-day lives. Every time when you go to the shop, the amount that people are having to spend, the fact we've got such high tax rates at the moment on working people. Labour will be setting out a really positive vision over these next 6 weeks about the change that our country desperately needs.
Daisy.
So the Liberal Democrats want to put health and social care front and centre of our campaign in this general election. I hear time and time again from people around the country who can't see a GP, they can't see a dentist, there are long waiting lists, they call an ambulance, they're scared it's not going to turn up, they use an Uber instead. These stories are heard in every community across the land. And
as you hear from what people are saying here, that's important to many people, no doubt, but it's not the only thing that matters to them. There's lots of other issues too.
Absolutely. And we've said that our priorities are NHS and social care and fixing that, tackling the cost of living crisis, which is still affecting many people around the country, and protecting our local environment, not least from the absolute scandal of raw sewage dumping in our local rivers and seas. So those are three of the issues that we want to address. And there's this really fascinating question about how do we save money? Where can we save money? Because politicians love to announce big sums of money and say we're going to spend this on that and this on that. one of the really interesting things about NHS and social care is that over years and years, the Conservative government have absolutely gutted primary care. There's not enough GPs, there's not enough dentists, there's not enough mental health nurses, there's not enough carers. And as a result, everybody ends up in A&E in an emergency. You could actually save money if you invested upstream. So taking an approach of investing upstream to save money later on would be better for the public purse, better for better for people's health outcomes, and better for our economy because people could get fixed and get back to work.
Right, keep your hands up because I'm going to come back to you. But before I do, so Tim, what do you think of what you had to hear from the audience here and the response we heard on the panel?
Well, I don't know whether a question time audience is typical, but it's nice to actually be talking about the issues after spending the last 24 hours talking about the rainfall in Downing Street. And
well, it's quite tempting to talk about that as well, just since you mentioned it. I mean, when you saw that, I mean, were you watching it through your fingers, or did you think, no, here's a guy who's just determined no matter what the elements throw at him?
Well, you're distracting me now, Fiona, because I wanted to talk about the issues. But,
well, let's just hear about that and then let's get back to the issues.
Look, I thought it was dreadful. It looked, you know, it looked like a Prime Minister drowning, and it's sort of the metaphors, you know, wrote themselves. Although neighbours of mine in Salisbury sort of said they felt quite sorry for a man that was, you know, faced all sorts of adversity, not the most popular person, even in his own party, probably going to lose the next election, but standing there, making his pitch to the people, probably one of the most decent men I've come across in politics. And sometimes I think people outside of politics see it differently than those who observe and are most worried about the sort of theatrics of it all. But if I can return to the questions and that, because we have spent a lot of time talking about the weather, and the three really good people on this panel, they're people in public service for the right reasons. Politicians get a bad reputation unfairly, in my view. But the questions you've posed today are really important. We're only 24 hours into the campaign, and we're already hearing the tired slogans. Let me be clear. You know when a politician says, let me be clear, you know they're not going to be clear. You know, they're talking about their children's grandchildren. We've heard all the expressions. This country's in trouble. This country is in big trouble. The West is in trouble. Let's not be parochial. We are declining economically. The security of our civilization is under threat from China, Iran, civilizations that are becoming much more powerful. And what do we get from our politicians? We get sound bites. What I'm hoping for in this campaign, and maybe we can start today, is real solutions. Labour, they had, up until recently, a £28 billion commitment to tackle climate change. It's been completely diluted. The Tories say that defence is the main issue, and yet their commitment to raise defence spending to 2.5%, they're only going to do it over sort of 7 to 10 years. Well, Putin's not going to wait for us to fund our army before he attacks us. Where is the radicalism? Where is the solutions proportionate to the challenges we face? I'm hopeful we'll get something in the manifestos, but if we only get caution from our politicians, then the Western decline that we see all around is going to advance. I'm worried that this election's going to be dull, and it's up to all of us to ask the hard questions, to get our politicians to be an awful lot braver than they are at the moment.
Right. Well, let's hear some of those questions then. Yes, man there in the blue sweater.
Mark, I think you need to read the room a bit. When you said that you've delivered for the country and that the economy's turned the corner, people around here laughed at you because no one is feeling it. You know, you take a walk now through Coventry city centre, it's changed. I mean, people having to choose between heating their homes and feeding their kids. The NHS is on its knees. Knife crime and youth violence is rising all over the country. Your party has let us down over the last 14 years. You're going to lose terribly, and you're going to deserve to lose.
So, I mean, to be clear, I didn't say everything was right, and I do acknowledge there are huge challenges there. You know, we have faced, as Tim indicated, huge global challenges. A war in Ukraine, which has driven the price of food and energy through the roof. We've seen a global pandemic, which cost the country billions and billions of pounds. And the shock of that, of course, it has led to long waiting lists in the NHS, all of those challenges.
The waiting lists were long before that.
But clearly, COVID has had a huge impact on that as well. And I think the only way you solve that, is with a strong economy that allows you to fund and to meet the challenges that we all recognise that we're facing. And I'm not saying for a second that all things are rosy in the garden because of those challenges we face, but my point is that we've just started to turn that corner and the economy now is starting to grow. Not my words. The Bank of England, the OBR and the IMF are all saying that we've now turned the corner and we're improving.
Woman here in the black top.
I'd just like to make 2 points. The first one is about the issue that's really important to me in the election, and that is the safety of women. We are seeing record levels of violence against women across the country, across the world, so much so that the Prime Minister of Australia has called it a crisis only a few weeks ago after the marches that have been happening there. Rape is pretty much decriminalised in this country because of the prison overpopulation issue. Judges are recommending that those few rapists that even do get convicted don't get a custodial sentence. The second point I'd like to make, I'm sick to death of hearing about politicians wanted to make savings. Where are my taxes going? Where are the taxes of everyone in this room going? Why are you not taxing billionaires and millionaires?
Yeah,
why is Jeff Bezos in Amazon making billions of pounds? Why is Jeff Bezos making billions of pounds, whereas workers in Coventry here who work for Amazon are on benefits, are struggling to pay their bills? What are you all doing about that? Are you best mates with them? Why are you not doing anything about that?
Right, Bridget, you want to be in power come July. Yeah. Would you like to answer that woman there? She made her point very powerfully.
Absolutely, and on both points. So on the first point about violence against women and girls, I could not agree more about how important an issue this is. Before I was a politician, I managed a women's refuge for women affected by domestic violence. So I feel really strongly and passionately about the need to tackle this. We do need more police on our streets. We need more specialists working in this area, and we absolutely have to see a criminal justice system where victims get the justice they deserved. As you've just described there, so few cases ever even get to court, and if they do, we don't see the prosecutions. And that's why so many women don't feel safe walking down the streets at night, and sadly, too many women don't feel even safe in their own homes, and that absolutely has to change. And we are determined, if we win the next election, that we will change that. And one final observation on that point. When I was managing that women's refuge back in 2008, 2009, I saw Keir Starmer on the television as Director of Public Prosecutions talking about this issue. As Director of Public Prosecutions, he made it a personal priority to tackle this issue, to make sure that women got justice. And, you know, that was the first time I noticed him, long before he was ever a politician. And that's what he will bring as Prime Minister, a renewed focus on that area.
To the woman's second point, which was, what about taxing billionaires and millionaires, as you put it? I mean, Keir Starmer said he would increase taxes for the highest earners. He's dropped that pledge. So why are you going to answer her on that?
We need a fairer tax system overall. I completely agree. We've got to position...
You're not going to be raising taxes on higher earners?
Well...
Or are you? Do tell if you suddenly
there are a number of changes that we would make to the tax system to make it fairer. So, for example, we would end the non-dom tax status and those loopholes. The government have said some action will happen on that, but not the full entirety of the loopholes we want to close. We would end the tax breaks that private schools enjoy. We'd put that money directly into more teachers and more mental health support in our state schools, which are under real pressure at the moment. And alongside that...
This is really small amounts of money, though, isn't it? Really small amounts of money. You're not talking about big changes to the tax system.
Well, I think what we need to see, first and foremost, is economic stability. We haven't had that, and part of what Mark was describing there in terms of the impact that we have seen in recent years and months came about directly when you had a government in the shape of Liz Truss that was reckless and cavalier with the public finances. We would take our responsibilities incredibly seriously, and we're determined that the plans that we set out, we're confident that we can deliver. So there will be a fairer tax system overall. And I do think we need to go back to...
Does that mean higher taxes for higher earners, then?
Well, we're at the moment, where it comes to the tax system overall, working people are facing record tax bills at the moment. Taxes are at a record high, so we do need a fairer system. But we also need to make sure that the UK is competitive for businesses to come and invest as well.
Man there in the glasses.
Thank you. We keep on talking about building a stronger economy. We know for a fact that workforce, the UK workforce, is actually the core, backbone of any given economy. So, for instance, the UK labour stats recorded that about 29.3 million people are actually employed, and about 4.5 million people, and I'm talking about 2024, are self-employed. Now, I'm self-employed. And my question is there a plan to actually repeal the off-payroll legislation, also known as IR35? Because, like I said earlier on, every economy depends on freelancers. I'm an IT consultant. And because of this singular act of the government, introducing policies like that, the UK freelance sector right now is at an all-time low, even pre-pandemic. Now, I've been out of role for the past 3 months. I'm a high earner. I contributed a lot to tax. In the last 2 years, I've contributed over £150,000. Yeah, but yet I don't qualify for any benefit.
OK, so let's just explain, because not everyone's familiar with IR35. IR35, correct me if I've got this wrong, but IR35 is legislation which means rather than working as a freelance, and Schedule D, I think it's called, you effectively have to be employed by whoever happens to be employing at the time as a member of staff, complete with the benefits and the pension, all the rest of it, and some companies don't want to do that because of the extra cost that that incurs. Yeah. Is that something that Lib Dems would change?
Yeah, I've been very active on this issue, actually, and what I would say is there's a lot of self-employed people who are getting a really raw deal at the moment. There's the IR35 scandal, there's also the connected issue of the loan charge. These are two sort of slightly different issues, but they're sort of connected, and we would review both of those, and there's actually a cross-party campaign in Parliament to try and get HMRC and the Treasury to look particularly at the loan charge issue as well as IR35 and to look at those rules. If I may just come back to the lady's point earlier about the taxes, honestly, I think you speak for Britain, because I have spoken to so many people who ask me that very same question. Why are there all these massive companies raking in billions of pounds in profit when ordinary folk can't afford to put food on the table? Well, what I can tell you as a Liberal Democrat is that we don't believe that we should be taxing ordinary folk during a cost of living crisis, but the big banks have been given a £3 billion tax cut by this Conservative government, which we would reverse. The big oil and gas companies have been paying for a windfall tax, but there's such an enormous loophole in it that there's billions of pounds more that they could be paying. We've got the big water companies. Again, they've been effectively asset stripping, taking out loans to pay themselves dividends, taking billions of pounds in profit, and we're being asked to pay for increased water bills. All of that is really, really unfair. And we've said, actually, that those big companies should be paying a lot more to pay for our public services.
OK. Now, I'm going to move on, only because we've got 6 weeks of this. So I think we'll be coming back to quite a few of these subjects over and over again. But I just want to say where we are next week. We're going to be in Epsom in Surrey. So if you fancy being part of that audience, go to the Question Time website. And I should just say that the list of all our locations are there. Some of them are going to change now, because it was a bit of a spanner was thrown in the works with the announcement yesterday. So we need to make sure we get around the whole of the UK. So don't take the rest of it as gospel. But we are definitely in Epsom in Surrey next week. Right, let's now, you mentioned water. You mentioned water over there. Claire Hartree, let's have your question.
So, as a wild swimmer, I'd like to know what the panel thinks should be done about sewage spills and who should foot the bill.
So just tell us about your experience with wild swimming, then.
So, I've been a wild swimmer for about 5 years now. I got into it in lockdown because I missed our swimming pools. And we don't have any coastline around here, so we have to rely on the rivers.
And what's your experience of the quality of the water?
Dreadful. So I've been going to the old bathing place in Stratford over the last 5 years, and a couple of years ago, friends of mine, their children got ill. So now we have to go to Dosthill, which is about 40 minutes away in Tamworth. It's a quarry, so there's no chance that there's any runoff off the lands or anything that's coming from the water companies.
Right,
so.
OK. So what should be done about the sewage spills in our water, and how should we foot the bill? And it's worth just saying this week that water companies in England and Wales want bills to increase, according to the Consumer Council for Water, by between 24% and 91% over the next 5 years. So the Consumer Council for Water is a kind of consumer watchdog. And you've got Southern Waters asking for the biggest jump, 91%. Severn Trent is this area. You'll be familiar with that. And they have asked for bills to rise by 50% in the next... I can hear all sorts of gasps there. By 50% in the next 5 years to £657 per annum. Who should be paying those bills, then, Bridget?
I mean, what we just heard there and what's been going on is a total scandal. You know, we're in a situation where there hasn't been proper reporting about the number of discharges. We absolutely need to see tougher regulation, more fines and firmer action on this. My part of the world, the northeast of England, we've got an amazing coastline. All of us, we should be able to enjoy that and take our kids there and not have to worry about getting sick because of what's being pumped onto our beaches. So there is no way that water company bosses should be getting big bonuses while all of this is going on.
But even if they don't get big bonuses, I mean, Severn Trent's boss was paid nearly £13 million over the last 4 years. Just thought I'd throw that in there. I mean, you've got companies like Thames Water, for example, which was effectively struggling to keep... I was going to say struggling to keep afloat. That's an unfortunate metaphor in the circumstances. But, you know, they've got a debt of something like £15.6 billion. You've got investors saying they're not going to spend any more money on it. It's not just going to be Thames Water. This is going to be something that a number of waters are kind of going to struggle with. Where is the money going to come from to increase our sewerage? You want to build loads of houses. Where's the money going to come from to increase the sewerage system, to stop the leaks, and to stop sewage spills going in? Are we all going to have to pay for it? Or if you are in government, are you going to find the money from somewhere?
Well, of course, developers, when they're building housing, have to be a part of this. And
but only
much wider. Well, only a part in the same way that they have to be part of the answer where it comes to broadband and much more besides. But on the particular point about water, I mean, this is one really, really big area where we've ended up in a complete and utter mess on this topic, in the situation that you've just described there, where it comes to Thames. And the last thing I want is for the taxpayer to be on the hook.
OK, so where's the money going to come from? That's the question. Because there's no easy answer. I'm not suggesting there is. But there's potentially... We're all going to be on the hook for billions and billions of pounds to increase our infrastructure. Who's going to pay for it?
Well, the water company should have been investing over the decades.
But we are where we are now, so who's going to pay for it?
The water companies need to be held responsible, and water company bosses need to be held responsible for their total failure to invest since privatisation in the infrastructure.
Find the billions of pounds? Is that what you're saying?
Well, they should have been doing this already. That was the point of privatising.
I'm just trying to work out. I'm not disputing that. But you want to be in power in a couple of months.
Absolutely.
You've got water companies that are going to have to find billions of pounds for infrastructure. You've got Thames Water who's in debt and their investors saying, well, we're not going to pay. And the government's looking at possible plans to renationalise. Should you be in power, where's the money going to come from?
Well, the water companies need to crack on and make some progress on this, and they should not be paying out bonuses.
So they need to find the money from their investors.
They should not be paying out bonuses to company directors when they are pumping raw sewage into our rivers and into our seas. But I would just say, very politely, we've had 14 years now, and I don't know what the Tories have been doing on this absolute scandal.
Well, we'll come to them. We'll come to them. But since you want to be in power, I'd like to know where you're going to find the money as well.
You know, do you know what? I've been waiting for these moments. Now we're into a general election campaign. Suddenly, the Labour Party can't say... when faced with a question, what would you do? They can no longer say, well, I wouldn't do what the government's done. Yep. Suddenly they've got to come up with a policy, and that was a complete
What's
blank
happened
space
over the last 14 years, Mark?
So let me tell
You've been in government now for 14 years. What is your record on this topic?
Let me tell you exactly what's happened, actually. So, sewage discharge has happened since the Victorian times. Richard Benyon, Lord Benyon, Conservative Minister...
We expect slightly higher standards now than the Victorian times.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, come on. In the Victorian times, Buckingham Palace was being flooded with sewage. We expect a bit better now.
Yeah. So Lord Benyon came along. When he came into power as a Conservative, only 7% of those discharges were being monitored. Now it is 100%. So we now know
the scale
how bad it
actually
is. Absolutely.
Right.
And so this has been happening for decades.
We should
not be grateful at all. This is a huge problem to be solved, and that's why we now have this plan
how are you going to
do
solve
it. So we started with stronger regulation to make sure that those water companies are held to account. We started with more inspectors, so there are more inspectors within the Environment Agency to make sure that those people are being held to account.
Let me ask you the same question I asked Bridget, in fairness. It's clear that the water companies, if Thames Water is anything to go by, are going to have to find billions of pounds for infrastructure. Who's going to be paying for that?
So
Should you get into power after
They are
July?
being held to account, and they have come forward with £60 billion over the next 25 years to invest in that infrastructure to make sure that we do now start to solve this huge challenge.
What, Thames Water's not come forward with that, have they?
No, all of the water companies together have committed to £60 billion worth of investment over the next 20 years to put this right. And it is a huge challenge. It is a massive challenge to put right. And that's why we're holding them to account. Actually, Severn Trent Water, where we sit here, were prosecuted and convicted by the Environment Agency and held to account. That's what we should be doing.
You know what, Liberal Democrats have been leading on this issue for around 3 years, trying to raise awareness of it in Parliament. We have said very clearly we need to stop the sewage dumping, and there's a few things you can do to do that. So first, you ban the bonuses immediately. Secondly, you create a sewage tax and make the water companies pay to clean up their own mess. You scrap Ofwat, because it's been proven to be a rubbish regulator, and replace it with a real regulator with teeth. We need to freeze prices for water bills, and then change the structure of our water companies, so they become public benefit companies, so they are forced by law to put environmental principles over profit. That's how we do it.
OK. Woman there, you've got your glasses in your hair, yeah.
Thank you. I think there's a big elephant in the room that's not being discussed, and a lot of the political campaigns evolve around infrastructure and building the country. We have a number of scandals that have unravelled over the last 2 years, starting from Grenfell to Windrush to the post office scandal, now the infected blood scandal. I think we need to fix some of these issues first before we talk about building and ensure that everybody gets the compensation they are entitled to. What I want to know from each political party is how they're going to ensure that everyone receives that compensation quickly and fairly, and where is that money going to come from before we talk about any other money?
OK. That is a very good question. I'm going to stick with the subject we're discussing, if you'll forgive me, simply because a lot of people asked about water, but that is clearly what you're talking about is extremely important. Yes, the man here in the blue shirt.
Just so I've got this straight, you guys are going to raise the money from the water companies, correct? Thames, I think it was Thames Valley, were on the verge of going bust last year. Thames Water were on the verge of going bust last year.
They say they've got enough to keep operating till 2025.
Right. We have been let down by the government on this matter. We've been let down by the owners of the water companies. We've been let down by the directors of the companies. The directors of the companies, if you look at the water industry as a whole, it's like the perfect business model. Their market is the whole of the UK. Everyone who owns a home, every business. Their customers are forced to actually use their company. There's zero competition. And on top of it, they're selling a product that's made up 70% of the Earth's surface. If you cannot get that right, you should not be running a business, period.
Tim. You wanted radical policies. Are you hearing them?
Well, no. I'm a capitalist. I believe in the free enterprise system. We all recognise and award people in our country who give to charity, invent, do great social deeds. People who create jobs, create industries, they are people we should admire as well. I love free enterprise, I love business. But what I will not defend are businesses that don't take risks. These are, as the gentleman there has just described, these are gentlemen who basically, these are companies who have natural monopolies. And what they're doing is they're not taking risks themselves. They're getting paid the same bonuses, the same rewards that people who are taking risks are getting. So it's all gain for them and no cost. I'm a Conservative, but I've seen this experiment go on for too long. We need to nationalise these companies if they continue to fail on the scale that they are. It can't be a nationalisation for long, because what we do know from history is that politicians think in short term. And so that if there's a choice between investing long-term in the infrastructure of our railways or our waterworks, they will choose the NHS's wages, or they'll choose police wages or whatever. But at the moment, the shareholders who've gained an awful lot from these privatised companies need to pay the price. They've enjoyed a great windfall, and it's time now to be nationalised and sold again potentially in the future to owners who will actually manage them properly.
Right, let's take another question from Elizabeth Norton. Where are you?
My question for the panel is, how would you help universities survive the current financial crisis without raising tuition fees?
So, the Office for Students report that 40% of England's universities are expected to run budget deficits this year. Vice-Chancellors are reportedly saying that increases of £2,000 to £3,500 a year per student would be needed. And, of course, tuition fees have been frozen since 2017. Daisy?
Well, I think that in this country we should be incredibly proud of our British universities. In many cases, they are world-leading. Not only do they attract students from around the world to come and study here, the brightest and the best, which we're told by this government they want to apparently attract here, despite stopping them with changes to visa systems, but our universities also have a fantastic export because they expand around the world, as I know the local university here has done.
So what would you do about funding? I think everyone was... I mean, we're at Coventry University here. I don't know if there are any students from the university here, but, oh, look, a few hands going up. I'm sure they're very proud of their university. Let's take that as a given. Yeah. What are you going to do about the money?
Well, I think there's a number of things you can do. I mean, the first is that you shouldn't cut off their funding from having international students coming here to study. You should incentivise...
So the Lib Dems would not reduce numbers of foreign students coming to
No, we have long maintained that you should actually take those numbers out of the migration statistics altogether because they skew them, and actually we should welcome students to come here. But separately, we should support our universities to export and to be a proud British export to the rest of the world. Many universities have fantastic partnerships with private companies, whether that's for research and development, whether that's for regenerating town centres. Universities are a hub of employment and they can be a hub of regeneration. So universities themselves are not short of ideas on what they could be doing to...
But what they do say financially is that they run at a loss when it comes to teaching students from the UK, and they run at a loss when it comes to research. So would the Lib Dems give the universities more money?
Well, I'm a strong supporter of research and development, and we've always maintained as a party that there should be a bigger budget for research and development.
So you would give the universities more money?
But what I'll say is, going into this general election, I'm not going to start making promises about more money here, there and everywhere, unless I know for certain it's a pledge we've already made. But
OK. I just wondered if it was something you'd already thought about.
When it comes to the manifesto, it will be fully costed, and we'll have our details in there about what we will be spending our money on. But what I would say is, as a first principle, we shouldn't be tying the hands behind the backs of universities and stopping them from being able to run a basic operating model by restricting the number of students that they can have.
Mark, well, the number of foreign students has dropped as a result of something that the government has brought in, which is allowing only students studying a PhD to bring dependents with them. But this is what you wanted, that the number of foreign students would drop, is it?
So I think we've got to look around the telescope the other way, actually, and what universities are for. They're about making sure the next generation have career opportunities and can benefit the UK economy with their new skills and the skills that they've acquired as they go through university, or via another system of supported employment. And I think that's how we should be viewing these things. Are we getting the right skills to our next generation, and how does that model work? And I think, as Daisy said, we do have some of the best universities, genuinely best universities anywhere in the world.
And quite a few of them are saying they're suffering a financial crisis. Well, so what would you do about that?
Some of the work that they're doing is very worthy, and I think they are worthy of that support. But we've got to make sure we get that model right.
So hang on, but what does that actually mean? Does it mean, if they're saying we're running at a loss unless we have more international students, does that mean taking more international students again? Does that mean increasing tuition fees, or does that mean giving more money to universities?
I think we've got to make sure that the number of university places that exist within the United Kingdom match the if you like, the necessity for the UK economy and for our next generation. And
but in terms of answering the question, which is how can you help universities survive the financial
more students piled into universities, I'm saying, is not necessarily the right outcome for the UK economy or for those young people.
OK, so how would you help universities balance the books? That's
basically
the question.
I think they've got to make sure that their books are run in an efficient way, and that they are acquiring the right young people for the right courses, and that they're cutting their cloth according to the skills required for the next generation.
How's that going to help them find more money?
Well, the argument that you're making is that we should...
Well, I'm not making an argument at all. I'm just saying that universities are saying that they're just financially struggling. Yeah. And I'm just trying to work out what you think the answer... And at the moment you're saying, well, they just need to make sure we've got the right students to suit the needs of the economy, which is an entirely fair point. But I'm not sure how that's going to help their finances.
Is increasing the number of students the right model to go? And the point that I'm making is that I don't think increasing that number of students is the right model for our universities. Okay. But I don't think that delivers the right outcomes for the economy.
So raising tuition fees then? Would that be an answer?
No, I don't think that is the answer either. I think, actually, it's probably less students in those universities.
So you want fewer students to go to university?
No, I'm saying that we need to make sure the career options for those young people are the right ones. And sometimes going to university is not the right career option for that generation. And actually, if you look at some of the apprenticeship schemes around the country, I mean, some cracking ones here actually in these Midlands,
so
with Jaguar, Land Rover, Toyota.
Fewer students at university, perhaps possibly more apprenticeships.
Yes.
Yeah.
OK, Tim.
Right. You wanted radical policies from me a minute ago.
It took quite a while to get there, but we got there in the end.
And this is probably why I'm not standing for election, unlike the other three people on the panel. I think Daisy and Mark have both said we have some of the world's best universities. We also have some really rubbish ones. Really rubbish ones. Well, if you look at, for example, a lot of courses in our universities where people are getting into huge debt, borrowing huge amounts of money to go on these courses, since the pandemic ended, they aren't getting the tuition restarted.
Name the institutions.
I'm not going to name the institutions, but I can go. If you go through the average list of courses, what people get.
If you're going to say that, be honest about who it is you're talking about here. What you're talking about is kids from working class communities who, for the very first time, not had the chance to get to university.
No.
And they might not earn a big salary immediately after coming out, but the chance to get an education is something that should be so important to us. So name those institutions, tell us which courses. There's a lack of honesty in this argument.
No, there isn't a lack of honesty, because if you look at the average remuneration that people get after they've been through a very expensive higher education, a lot of universities don't help those people at all.
Did you go to university?
I did go to university,
Yeah, so did I. And now you want to take that away?
What I want to give to everyone in this country is the opportunity to get them an education that serves them well for their lifetime. And at the moment, we are telling a lie, and you are seemingly replicating that lie.
Hang on, let's come to you, Bridget. Let's just hear it, and then
what we're telling to people is go to university, get a really rubbish degree, get into lots of debt, and we're not helping those people. There are Rolls-Royces of universities and there are Reliant Robins of universities. And
but when we
overfund our universities, what we don't give is those people who want the apprenticeships that Mark mentioned, or lifetime relearning, because we're in a world situation at the moment whereby something you learn in your 20s might still not be relevant when you're 40 or 50. We need to have the money not to give privileged people an education at 20, when that means that someone who's perhaps in a working class trade can't get re-educated when they're 40 or 50. That's the real choice, and pretending it's otherwise is the dishonesty.
It is not one or the other. It is not one or the other.
It is. You have to... In politics, Bridget, you have to choose, and you're not choosing.
I absolutely want to see more apprenticeship starts in our country for young people, and they've fallen off a cliff in recent years. But alongside that, our universities aren't just for 18-year-olds going away from home for the first time. They're for adults throughout their lives. The adults that I've met that have gone back and have trained as nurses, the adults that have gone back and trained as teachers in their 30s and their 40s and their 50s. It really isn't one or the other. And if we are going to be a competitive, successful economy, then we have to give people the opportunity to learn, to study, to upskill right throughout their working lives, and universities are a key part of that.
So, Bridget, let's get the answer from you then. So, Elizabeth's got her hand up again. I will come back to you, Elizabeth. But how would you help universities survive the current financial crisis without raising fees?
I'll be upfront with Elizabeth. This is really, really tough, and our universities are facing enormous challenges, and the answers are not straightforward. And if I were to say to you, this is easy and the options are clear and straightforward, I don't think you would believe that. We've ended up in a situation where, because tuition fees have been frozen over an extended period of time, that means that universities are increasingly struggling to cover the cost of tuition. Now, our international students that come to this country, who make it their home for a limited period, make an enormous contribution to our towns and cities. I'm sure you all see it here. I see it in Sunderland, where I'm an MP. But those international students increasingly are cross-subsidising the education of domestic students because of the situation that we've ended up in. The challenge alongside that, however, is that our young people, when they leave university, now have a system which, as of September just gone, is even more regressive than it once was. So a nurse ends up paying more. Someone who earns a big salary working in the city pays less.
But what's your answer? You say the answers are not simple, and I'm sure they're not. But you'd like to be in power in a couple of months, so you're going to have to find some. So how would you help universities get more money?
So from opposition, again, to be totally upfront about this, from opposition, it is genuinely very difficult to grapple.
So you haven't got an answer again. You haven't got an answer again. You're adopting the answer again.
Hang on, let Bridget speak.
Look, it is the modelling around this is really complicated in terms of the outcomes. I am determined that we can deliver a more progressive system without any more spending or borrowing, but from the system that we have at the moment for students.
But as Shadow Education Secretary, Bridget, you must have thought about
out there. You can go and look at where that absolutely can be delivered. The other part of the answer, in terms of what we can do around investing more money directly into our universities, is to support them around spin-outs, around research, and around the business impact that they can have.
But what does that mean, support? Does that mean give them money? What does that mean?
It means encouraging them to be involved in wider activity that they can then reinvest in their institutions. But we've had 14 years where things have got progressively worse, and there are so many pressures on the public finances. We've heard this evening, from water to the NHS to education and university.
Well, let's stick with education just for a minute. You're Shadow Education Secretary.
Yeah.
If you win the election, I'm assuming you want to be Education Secretary, would you raise tuition fees?
That is a really, really unpalatable choice. I do not want to have to do that. I absolutely don't, because when I speak to students across the country, what they tell...
No, not going to rule it out, clearly.
When I speak to students across the country, what they tell me is that increasingly they can't manage the cost of living. We need to look at all of the options around that, and I want to make sure that young people from less well-off backgrounds have the support that they need to go to university if that is what they want.
Elizabeth, what do you think of what you've heard?
I think that it is a complicated issue, but to not fund universities is a political choice in itself, and that people are very keen to make choices for other people's children where they can and can't go. I think there are 3 models that we can consider, and that's a graduate tax, which is more progressive than the system that we currently have now, increased employer contributions, and unfortunately direct investment from government has to increase, because I don't think we can saddle our young people with any more debt than we're currently doing. If we looked at a graduate tax system, which was time limited and linked to earnings, then people would pay less over their lives. And I think there needs to be looking at the fairness of the system, so that people who are studying nursing, midwifery, allied health subjects don't have to get themselves in debt to become the people who care for us and provide our vital services.
OK. All right. Thank you, Elizabeth. We've got 15 minutes left, and I'm going to try and squeeze another question in from David Marston.
The bloodshed in Gaza is about the individual ambitions of the Israeli government and Hamas, not peace and security. Should we welcome the intervention from the International Criminal Court?
So, this week, a prosecutor for the International Criminal Court filed applications for warrants for the arrest of Benjamin Netanyahu and his defence minister and 3 Hamas leaders. And he said there are reasonable grounds to believe that both bear criminal responsibility for war crimes and crimes against humanity, obviously in relation to the events of October the 7th and the military action that has taken place since. That doesn't mean these arrest warrants are going to happen, necessarily. A panel of judges at the International Criminal Court will now consider whether or not these arrest warrants will be issued or not. Mark?
So, I think it's a distraction, frankly. I think what we need is a pause in the fighting to get the aid in there, to get those hostages back home safely to Israel and to stop the bloodshed. And the only way that happens is by a negotiated settlement to get the hostages back to Israel and to get aid in to support the people that are being injured and killed in this terrible conflict.
I mean, the Prime Minister said just in December last year, we are a strong and long-standing supporter of the International Criminal Court. So is he only a strong and long-standing supporter when he likes the decisions they make?
Yeah, well, they haven't made a decision. That's the point, isn't it? They haven't made a decision.
No, you're right. They haven't yet.
And there's a further process to go through. My point is, it's a complete distraction. What we should be focused on is stopping people, the fighting there that's taking place in Gaza, so that we can have a pause to get humanitarian aid in, to get the hostages back home safely to Israel, so that they can remove Hamas from running that part of the Middle East, so that normal people can get back to living a normal life and not be being tortured, frankly, and bombed.
And should this panel of judges decide that an arrest warrant should be issued, and I appreciate I'm asking you a hypothetical question here, the legal situation would be that should Benjamin Netanyahu, obviously the leaders of Hamas are not going to come to the UK, but should Benjamin Netanyahu come to the UK, we should arrest him.
There's a whole process to go through there. I think I'm not going to get involved in speculating about that. I think we need to concentrate on putting all of our effort as the UK government to try and find a solution to get aid into that part of Gaza and to get the hostages back.
So Labour take a different view. The Shadow Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, says Labour's position is that the ICC Chief Prosecutor's decision to apply for arrest warrants is an independent matter for the court. So you're just wait and see what happens. And then presumably, as I say, if this arrest warrant goes ahead and Labour were in power, Labour would arrest the Israeli Prime Minister. So that's the natural sequence of events.
So it's an independent matter for the Chief Prosecutor who was going through that process. It is a formal process that should be gone through. The immediate priority does have to be getting to a ceasefire, getting the release of hostages, getting more aid into Gaza, and alongside that moving towards a two-state solution, a safe and secure Israel alongside a viable Palestinian state.
The question is, should we welcome the intervention from the ICC?
Well, I think the immediate priority has to be getting to a ceasefire.
No, you said that.
Yeah,
Let's answer the question. So should we welcome the intervention from the International Criminal
I think the
Court?
rule of law matters. I think the international rule of law matters. It used to matter to the Conservative Party as well. It matters to me. There is a process to go through. It's absolutely right that process happens.
Okay.
If that's what the Chief Prosecutor has determined, but this is only the first step. There has been no conclusion reached on this topic.
But given that Labour is taking a different position, I'm keen to explore it because, as I say, we're in a general election. You may be in power come second week of July. If this goes ahead through the ICC, and you say you support the ICC and the rule of law, you would be in the position as a government where you would have to arrest Benjamin Netanyahu should he come to this country. Would you do it?
So what you're setting out is a hypothetical scenario where you are a long way from that process.
Well, you either respect their decisions or you don't.
Well, but they haven't reached a decision. That's the point. You're asking me a hypothetical question.
Sure, but it's only one step away.
Well, I think it's a considerable distance away, but I do think it is right and proper that they follow the evidence, that they do their work thoroughly and properly. But my immediate concern is getting to a ceasefire, getting aid in and getting the hostages out.
OK, man there in the... I think you've got a dark blue sweater on, can't quite see.
No, thank you very much. I've come to this programme, really want to listen to what Labour Party is going to say. I used to vote for Labour Party, and you've not answered any question at all. See, you've not answered... Look, I know my local MP, Taiwo Watebe. I've spoken, I know her very well. But I just want to hear what the Labour Party wants to say about a lot of stuff. Okay. But tonight you've said nothing. You've just given us vague answers. Just answer the question and just convince me to vote for you. Okay. I want you. You know what I mean? Convince me. Tell me how.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm absolutely doing my level best to answer as directly as I can. I think I tried to be really, try to answer as honestly and straightforwardly.
So please make me vote for you.
I hope I've addressed the question around the International Criminal Court. If you want me to set out what Labour would do in education, for example, happy to do that. Breakfast clubs, skills, much more besides mental health support in our schools, more teachers in our classrooms. We've got an awful lot to say.
I understand that. In 2 months' time, you could be the Education Secretary.
Yep.
And if I were you, my advice would be, you can actually, it's a political choice. Mm-hmm. You can actually take the education budget and make it an investment instead of, making an expenditure. Why don't you do that? If you make it an investment, as they do in Singapore, in Norway, in Finland, take it away, make it an investment, and that reduces the budget deficit. Mm-hmm. That helps everyone. Invest in education, invest in special education needs, invest in university, do something, Labour Party. Please do.
Okay.
Education will be central to the work of the next Labour government. We will invest more in education, whether it's more teachers in our classrooms, universal free breakfast clubs for our children, more mental health support in our schools, careers guidance, work experience, more skills training. We've said a lot, we'll be saying more going into the election, but we do, I think, have to be upfront with the public about the scale of the challenge that we face as a country. We've been through some really tough times in the last couple of years with the impact that we've seen through all the insecurity, through what happened with Liz Truss, through the run on, the crash of the economy. But what I've set out, all of the plans I'm setting out, I'm confident we can deliver. I think, for example, breakfast clubs in our primary schools would make a really big difference. As children start their day at school, it delivers better outcomes for our children. It will help them get into school. We're facing a really big issue around attendance.
Hang on.
We're facing a really big issue around attendance. So there are lots of ways that we can and will make a difference.
We will talk about Gaza. In fairness, Bridget was asked a question about education. I think we need to give her room to answer it. Let's get back to the question at hand here. Should we welcome the intervention from the International Criminal Court? Do you welcome it as a Liberal Democrat?
Yes, I do, and I'll be very clear about why I do. As a Liberal, I'm an internationalist, and we in Britain used to have a proud reputation on the international stage for advocating and defending the principles of democracy, human rights and the rule of law, and this is about the rule of law. we should be supporting the International Court and its processes. Now, nobody is jumping the gun on what's going to happen in terms of that application, but I think the UK government should be giving the court its backing, its full backing, to follow the processes that it needs to follow. There are some heinous crimes that are happening in that part of the world.
But Daisy, the only reason I'm asking the others about arresting the Israeli Prime Minister is because if you're backing this now, presumably you back it all the way through, and the consequence of backing all the way through means that you could be in a position where the British government would have to arrest the Israeli Prime Minister. Would you be up for that?
In theory, that is a position that a future government could be in, and Liberal Democrats are clear that you have to uphold the rule of law without fear or favour. And if that is a logical consequence, then so be it. The fact of the matter is here that we've got, accusations of rape being used as a weapon of war, potentially starvation being used as a weapon of war. And the question I put to the Shadow Foreign Secretary in Parliament this week was that if the UK government, if the Conservative government does not back the jurisdiction of the ICC, then what legal mechanism will the government look to make sure that any of these crimes that anybody is brought to account for these crimes? And he could not answer the question. Now, I don't think that with our proud history of standing up for the rule of law, we can allow these crimes to go unnoticed and unpunishable. So I hope that the UK government does give the court its backing to follow its processes and to see where that independent process ends up.
A few years ago, Putin and the Syrian government carpet-bombed Aleppo, a city of hundreds of thousands of people who live middle-class existence like many of us here. City was basically razed to the ground. In Myanmar now, the Muslim population there is being basically ethnically cleansed by that government. Saudi Arabia, one of our allies, carpet-bombed Yemen. Why weren't any of those countries taken to the ICC? I think that Israel does have a case to answer, but I can't criticise them if we have a system whereby the only country in the world that seems to be taken to the ICC is the Jewish state. Why somehow are all other outrages in the world overlooked, but the Jewish state is persecuted by the ICC? We just had the United Nations fly its flag at half-mast in tribute, apparently, to an Iranian president who murdered 30,000 political prisoners and people. If our international institutions were genuinely independent, genuinely pursuing moral outrages everywhere on the planet, I would give them the backing that Daisy has. But they don't. They are morally lopsided, morally blind to some things, and very censorious about others. And that is why, until the ICC gets its game in order properly, I can't back what it's looked to do this week.
OK. I've got about 20 seconds left here. David, where are you? I just want to hear what you think of the responses you've heard here.
I don't think Mr Spencer says that it's a distraction, but I think Rishi Sunak was pretty negative. He didn't seem to suggest it was purely a distraction that was the problem.
Unhelpful.
And it seems that the UK government and the US government are very much against the ICC intervention. And it seems to me that that's a political decision rather than an ethical decision.
OK. All right. Well, thank you for your point. Our hour is up. Oh, my gosh, just the beginning. This is week 1. 6 to go. You looking forward to it? Or have you had enough already? Oh, come on, it's going to be great. Right, that's it for us. Next week we are in Epsom. I've no idea where we're going to be after that, but we'll find out. Thank you very much to David Howard, who's given these pictures of Coventry. Great to see those. The cathedral is just there, or I'm not sure. We're in the shadow of the cathedral, which is a wonderful building, and it's really lovely to be here in this university. Thank you to the panel. Thank you to all of you for coming along and taking part. And, of course, thank you to you at home for watching. From Question Time in Coventry, bye-bye.